We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Doctor of Audiology, Noreen Gibbons, is with us. She knows her stuff. And she's really mild-mannered and nice. That's what I like about her. She's mild-mannered and nice. Ask the audiologist if you... I'm just curious, in your studies over the years, how big is an eardrum? Have you ever held one in your hand? I mean, a model of one. Is there an eardrum? And it doesn't look anything like a drum, does it?
No, not really, but it's probably about the size of my pinky nail.
Pinky nail, that is the eardrum.
That's about the size, yeah.
And the cochlear bone, did you say?
Well,
or cochlear?
the cochlea is housed in the temporal bone, the hardest bone in your head, because of protective, it protects it. That and your balance system are so vital.
Right.
So,
I think that you can make the argument that is the most vital part of your body. Of course, your heart, your brain.
Right.
But if you don't have balance, and you have vertigo constantly, you're done.
Yeah. That's a
so it is
thing.
It is the cochlea. What is the cochlea? It is a nerve.
The cochlea is the sensory system for the auditory system. So you have the outer ear and the ear canal taking all the sound and the information in, transmitting it to the cochlea, and the cochlea transmits it to the auditory nerve. To make it simple.
So it's balanced. I always remembered the story of when the Russians were racing to go to outer space and they sent the astronaut up in Sputnik or whatever. And when he came back, because, they pulled it off, but the gravity, his inner ear was permanently messed up.
Yep.
What happened, do you imagine, when you leave and you go to weightlessness and you're in vertigo? When he came back to to Earth, I don't think he ever got his vertigo back. Yeah, that's typically referred to as barotrauma.
Scuba divers are very much at risk for this. When you too rapidly change the air, the pressure that you're in, and try to go back to atmospheric pressure, it very much can damage the inner ear.
Really?
The eardrum itself, you can have perforations. Those are big risk factors for barotrauma.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. I wanted to touch then on a little more on hearing aids and how, first of all, I guess, how would you say someone watching now thinking, okay, I ask people to repeat themselves a lot. Does that mean I need to go to a hearing specialist? How do you know when to go?
Well, certainly you can notice it yourself, and you can notice difficulty in noisy environments, maybe on the telephone, just general problems, just detecting, television, if you're needing to turn it up much louder. Another very good resource is your family.
Right.
If they're noticing you're having trouble, they are quite often correct about that.
I believe it.
It is a family affair, or it is other people that will notice your communication problems, more so sometimes than the individual themselves. We hear from people quite a bit of how can I get my father or mother or spouse, or whoever it is in the family, to do something about their hearing problem. I think one of the best ideas I ever heard was schedule an appointment for both of you. Just say, we're going to go get our hearing checked. It really should be part of overall health maintenance. It's not always, but it would be nice if we started to emphasize that so that people start paying attention to it sooner and get a checkup and see what's happening.
Now, my general practitioner, when I go for my annual physical, does what is that thing? The little thing that looks in the ear?
Oh, it looks in your ear?
Yeah, I mean, that's about all they do. Now, he'll ask me, are you having pain, problems, hearing, in which case I'm sure he'd refer me to someone like you. But essentially, that device with a little end and a light on it, and they look through there. What's he looking at there?
He can see the eardrum and the outline of the middle ear bones typically.
See if it looks inflamed or anything wrong with it.
Right, which doesn't have anything to do with the inner ear and the hearing that might be affected.
So that's just routine, maybe to see if there's something obvious outside. But I'd have to tell him if I was having a problem, and when she'd send me to a specialist.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so you have no choice. So you have to go seek that out. And you're so right. I'll sometimes be home watching TV, and my wife will come in and go, "Dang, turn that down."
Yep.
And so that's a cue. So the idea then is when someone comes to your office for the first time, it's a consultation, right? They come in, say, look, I'm having a problem with hearing. What do you do?
First thing we do is look in their ears.
Okay.
We want to make sure that there's not some sort of wax buildup, anything unusual. We're just looking for, obvious signs of a problem. Of course, that's after a case history and that sort of thing. And then we're going to take them, assuming there's no wax buildup, we're going to take them in the booth. We're going to put headphones on them. We're going to ask them to repeat words and respond to different tones. Hearing testing itself hasn't changed a whole lot. It's still the most reliable way, using very well-defined techniques. They've been established since 1940s.
It's the same way with vision, almost. I mean, the same thing, those letters on the wall, hearing, those beeps.
Yep, we can do additional tests, but the hearing assessment is still understanding speech and the lowest level that you can hear different tones, and we test the tones that are most important for communication. The human ear can hear a lot more than that, but we're focusing on communication. So that's the reason we'll do all that, and look for any obvious signs, any, obviously elevation of the thresholds, things like that. There are speech and noise tests that we'll often do that are also well-established, validated tests, recordings that we'll use to assess the person's ability to understand in noise, because if it's more significant, people with hearing loss almost always say they have difficulty in noise. Some people have more difficulty, and then we got to counsel a little bit differently and look at what's going to be most appropriate for their
Are the causes, I'm sure there's a variety of causes outside the realm, but is there a main general cause? Like when I come in, okay, I've told you I've got some basic hearing loss. I don't have anything really wrong with my ears. I've been fine for years, but it's beginning to fade. That's caused from what? Just wear and tear on the drum, and it's just not picking up like it once did? Well,
in this country, the most common cause for hearing loss is noise exposure.
Okay.
If you go to areas of the world where there is no noise exposure, you can see people in their 80s and 90s with relatively normal hearing. There's a lot of truth to that, whether it's music and Predators games. Don't.
Boy, it gets loud.
Give me a hard time
you go to
one,
concerts at the Preds, they're loud. And
industrial noise exposure, firearms, firecrackers. There's just so many things that do create the potential for hearing loss that it's very hard to rule that out in this country. So when someone comes in and they've maybe not had any noise exposure, I'll still say, well, what about when you were in college? Did you work in a factory, or did you? And then they'll, oh yeah, I went to some concerts and I had this ringing in my ears afterwards, as you mentioned. That's a risk factor for hearing loss later on. So
okay, so all those things come into play. And you were telling me then it can be something that was an incident or a practice years earlier.
Right.
And it kind of manifests itself later.
Correct. Yes. Yes,
right.
And there's hereditary issues with that too. For example, if your father or grandfather had noise exposure, and it does tend to run more in men, what we don't know, and what I'm interested in seeing, although I don't in a positive way, but I am concerned that as more women are exposed to noise in the military and firearms and that sort of thing, will we see the same pattern? I don't think we know that answer yet. I asked that at the conference I was mentioning, the Noise-Induced Hearing Loss Conference, or Hearing Conservation Conference that I went to, and that was something that the main presenter said, we really don't know, and I think it will be interesting to see. I hope not, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think about our military veterans, and certainly we have Fort Campbell near here, and I had a good friend, and he was assigned artillery.
Yeah.
And he kind of made a joke about it, but he talked about how he can't hear anything, and I'm like, really? He goes, well, now, even sometimes we'd wear some ear protection, but when you're next to these mortars or whatever, I'm sure many of our servicemen and women who've come back, God forbid if they were near an IED that exploded, came back with ear problems.
Well, this has been shown that the #1 and #2 disability coming out of the last 15, 20 years of conflict, hearing loss and tinnitus are the #1 and #2. Yep.
I figured it would have to be near the top. I mean, we know they come back with a variety of issues, but that's #1, the hearing loss, because it's so, what they're dealing with is so loud.
Yep, and it's very hard to protect yourself in that situation.
Right.
So that's where they're looking at some different medicines, some different approaches that would help serve as a protective measure, because they can't often wear earplugs, or they can't wear earplugs that are effective enough when you're talking about some of those exposures.
I'm to the point now, and I don't know if most people, would you recommend that, I carry a wallet. It's not big and bulky, but those little orange ear things that can go in there.
Yeah.
Would it be wise for people just to cap or a pair of those in your pocket and just carry that with your car keys in your pocket too? Because you just never know where you might be somewhere where it's really loud, and that'll come in handy.
Correct. Absolutely. I would recommend that. Those are inexpensive, and you pull them out. And
you lose them, you wash them, who cares? But they're not expensive, but it's, right?
Yep, absolutely.
I can think of noises I could encounter just down here. I was at a restaurant, and some knucklehead was there on his Harley with a typical no muffler situation. Now, he wasn't there too long, but it was loud. Yep. My ears were ringing when he left.
Oh, yeah. That's...
So if I had those plugs, I would have popped them in there. You know?
That would have been very smart of you.
All right, let's throw your contact information up because we couldn't answer all the questions here this morning, but that's where she's at,
That is where
in
I'm at.
Hendersonville, Tennessee, and you have the website, www.middletennesseeaudiology.com, and the number is 615-475-7706. Someone can call, make an appointment, come in, and basically go through the basics you just described. I would imagine some folks who have suffered hearing loss, okay, they don't know. It's a gradual process, and that's what I think. All of a sudden, if I get that hearing aid work, it could all of a sudden say, wow, I can hear music so much better now. I didn't know what I was missing.
Those are the fun stories to see.
I bet you enjoy that.
Very rewarding.
Where their eyes widen and go, wow, now I can really hear. So, Noreen, thank you.
Well, thank you
Always
for
a
your
pleasure
time.
having you on. Hopefully we'll see you again. But, you know, hearing is such an important part of our lives.
It is.
Thank you. We'll take
Thank
a
you.
break. I'll be back with a programming note right after this. Stay with us.